So as I just mentioned, we have our plywoods here that we're going to use. We're going to cut measuring from this end down to this end. And we'll take from this end out our 30 inches, and then it'll be fine. We don't have to do much to it because, I mean, all the edges are pretty square. A good way to make sure that that's true is to use some kind of square, and then make sure that you square it up on what you're doing. And, you know, if it's at least fairly square, you're good, because then you can always go back and plane it or sand it to do what you need to do with it. But that's really important, because if it's out of square, it really will mess up what you're doing. With the other piece, the top piece, the edges are really nice, so we don't have to do anything with it. We just have to measure both of these down, cut them off, and then we can draw out the designs on this one here, and then cut them with the jigsaw. And that's what we're about to do then. We're going to make our cuts and get everything measured out. What you need to make sure is that when you're measuring, make sure that the tip of your measuring tape is not loose. Sometimes they move, and then that can adjust, you know, up to 1/8 of an inch. I've seen some of them which it's just really bad. That can throw everything off. So you need to make sure that it's as precise as it can be. It's tight. I measure once out, just like so. And on this top piece here, like I mentioned, I'm going to make the cut just short of 30 by about 1/4 actually. And then on this one here, I'm going to make it at 30, just like so. When I've marked it, I take out my square, put it down, make sure that it's all nice and square, and then I mark it off. So using a square is very important on that. So what we need to do now is we just need to get this stuff set up. If you have the patience or the need, like when I'm making long cuts like these cuts when I made them, I use the straight edge just because they're long and I need something to guide. But for this here, I can probably cut it by eye, and then what I'll do though is I'll cut on the outside of the line, and by cutting on the outside of the line, any error that there may be, I can sand down or shave off with the plane. And then I'll do that on both sides just to make sure that I don't fall short on anything and mess up the design. Quick basic on skill saws, or I'm sorry, I'm actually using a skill saw, but they're technically called circular saws. Here is the blade that I was talking about for plywood. It's a fine cut. It actually does pretty good. There are a bunch of different companies that make them, so you can choose pretty much whichever one you want. Some of the cheaper ones will dull out faster and will warp, so just keep that in mind. Now, if you notice, I have it unplugged so that I could change this. Plus, the all-important safety glasses. You want those, and you probably want to use some earplugs as well. You want to make sure that all of your other materials are off the table so that you don't accidentally cut those. And whatever you're cutting, you want on the table, and only that at the time, unless you have a very large table, which I don't. Also, you want to make sure that whatever it is that you're cutting is balanced on the table, so that when you start cutting, if you can help it, one side doesn't start falling off. Because if it starts falling during a cut, what it can do is actually make the wood break instead of cut, and it can tear, and then that will make it leave it with a bad edge. Or more importantly, your saw can kick back and you can cut yourself, which is not good either. So those are just two little things. You don't want too much overhang, so my suggestion is to adjust based on what it is that you're cutting. I know a lot of guys who keep it at full depth all the time, and then they just basically cut based on that, but I don't like to do that. So I'm going to put mine down, my guard, and then now I'll lock it, and then I'll cut, and it'll just barely cut beyond the wood itself. But you always want to make sure that you cut deeper than the wood, because if you have to make a second cut, there's a good chance you're not going to cut it very well. So here we go. And there I have my first cut. I actually cut this one with the finished side up, which sometimes I do, but a lot of times I don't. It just depends on what I'm cutting and why I'm cutting it. And so now that one's just ready for us to draw out, and then we can cut it with the jigsaw later. And now I'm going to grab my other piece, put it up on here like so, and then I'm going to make the other cut. Another thing is, you can use this to cut with on the circular saw. It's a guide. I find that I don't do so well with that, so I actually watch the blade and see where it's cutting. But if you're going to watch the blade and actually see where it's at on the line, you may want to definitely make sure you have glasses on, because a lot of times it kicks up sawdust and it can get in your eyes. So, with those cuts, you can see that they're very clean, which is good, and then they're pretty straight. So all I have to do is sand it with a block a little bit and I'll be good. And then I can start sanding it down and getting it ready to assemble.